What if everything you believe about your thoughts is completely backwards? What if the voice inside your head, the constant mental chatter you've trusted your entire life, is actually your greatest deceiver? Right now, in this very moment, your mind is weaving elaborate stories, creating false identities, and trapping you in cycles of suffering that feel absolutely real, but are nothing more than illusions. The ancient masters of Tibetan Buddhism discovered something revolutionary over 1,000 years ago, a truth so profound that it challenges everything modern psychology teaches about the mind. Today we're diving deep into how your thoughts systematically deceive you, and most importantly, how you can break free from this mental prison using time-tested Tibetan Buddhist practices. If you're ready to see through the illusions your mind creates every single day, and discover who you really are beneath the constant mental noise, subscribe now and activate notifications, because this journey will fundamentally transform your relationship with your own consciousness. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting in a movie theater watching a film projected on a screen. The images flicker with light and shadow, characters appear and disappear, dramatic stories unfold with conflict and resolution. You know intellectually that what you're watching isn't real, that these are merely patterns of light creating the illusion of solid objects and living beings. Yet emotionally you become absorbed. Your heart races during tense scenes, tears flow during sad moments, laughter erupts at comedic timing. For those 2 hours, the illusion becomes your reality. Now here's the radical insight that Tibetan Buddhism offers. Your entire waking life operates exactly like this movie theater experience, except you've completely forgotten that you're watching a projection. The thoughts in your mind, the emotions coursing through your body, the solid sense of being a separate self navigating an external world, all of these are Maya, illusion, patterns of consciousness creating the appearance of reality where none exists in the way you perceive it. The Sanskrit term Maya has been translated variously as illusion, deception, or the unreal nature of the material world. But these translations don't quite capture the sophisticated meaning that Tibetan Buddhism assigns to this concept. Maya doesn't mean that nothing exists or that life is some kind of meaningless hallucination we should dismiss. Rather, Maya refers to the way we misperceive reality, the systematic errors in cognition that cause us to believe things exist in ways they fundamentally don't. We believe there is a permanent, independent self at the core of our being, when in fact what we call self is a constantly changing stream of mental and physical processes. We believe objects exist independently and solidly, when in fact everything is empty of inherent existence, arising only through causes and conditions in interdependent relationship with everything else. We believe our thoughts accurately represent reality, when in fact they are simply mental constructions, conceptual overlays we project onto raw experience. This misperception isn't random or accidental. It follows specific patterns that Tibetan Buddhism has mapped with extraordinary precision. At the root of all deception lies what Buddhists call fundamental ignorance. Not ignorance in the sense of lacking information, but ignorance as actively misconstruing the nature of reality. This ignorance manifests through what are called the kleshas, a Sanskrit term translated as mental afflictions, mind poisons, defilements, or obscurations. The kleshas are the mechanisms through which your thoughts systematically deceive you, creating suffering where none would exist if you could simply see clearly. Buddhist psychology identifies 5 primary kleshas, though different schools enumerate them slightly differently. The first and most fundamental is ignorance itself, called avidya in Sanskrit, the failure to recognize the true nature of mind and phenomena. The second is attachment or craving, called raga, the compulsive grasping at pleasant experiences and the desperate attempt to make them permanent. The third is aversion or hatred, called dvesha, the equally compulsive pushing away of unpleasant experiences and the futile attempt to make them cease. The fourth is pride or ego inflation, called mana, the construction of an inflated sense of self that must constantly be defended and promoted. The fifth is doubt or uncertainty, called vicikitsa, not healthy skepticism, but paralyzing confusion that prevents clear seeing and decisive action. These 5 mental poisons work together in devastating combination. Ignorance creates the fundamental misperception that you are a separate, permanent self that must be protected and promoted. Based on this false premise, attachment arises as you grasp at anything that seems to enhance this illusory self. Aversion follows as you push away anything that threatens it. Pride inflates the sense of self-importance. Doubt undermines your confidence in your ability to see clearly or make progress. And this entire cycle perpetuates itself automatically, thought after thought, day after day, creating what Buddhists call samsara, the endless cycle of suffering. Here's where the deception becomes truly insidious. These mental afflictions don't announce themselves honestly. Attachment doesn't say, "I am an affliction causing you suffering." Instead, it disguises itself as love, as preference, as reasonable desire. Aversion doesn't identify itself as a mind poison, but masquerades as discernment, as justified anger at injustice, as necessary boundaries. Pride presents itself as healthy self-esteem. Doubt appears as intellectual sophistication. Your thoughts create elaborate narratives that justify and rationalize these afflictions, making them seem not only acceptable, but virtuous, necessary, even defining characteristics of who you are as a person. Contemporary Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chödrön explains that kleshas are the mental states that bind us to suffering, manifesting as craving, aversion, and ignorance. Through meditation and cultivating awareness, she teaches, we can unravel the grip of the kleshas and awaken our inherent wisdom and compassion. This is the promise that Tibetan Buddhism offers, not through acquiring something new, but through removing the obscurations that prevent us from recognizing what has always been present, our inherent Buddha nature, the pure awareness that exists beneath all the mental turbulence. But how exactly do these afflictions manifest in the constant stream of thoughts that fills consciousness from the moment we wake until we fall asleep? Tibetan Buddhism uses a vivid metaphor to describe the untrained mind, the monkey mind, or in the original Chinese, Xinyuan, which literally means heart-mind-monkey. This concept, dating back to at least the 7th century, describes a state of restlessness, capriciousness, and lack of control in one's thoughts. An untrained mind jumps from one thought to another, with the chaotic energy of a monkey swinging wildly from branch to branch in a tree, never settling, never still, completely at the mercy of whatever stimulus or association triggers the next mental movement. The early Buddhist texts that introduced this metaphor paired it with another image, the idea horse, representing how concepts and intentions gallop forward with uncontrolled haste. Together, these images paint a picture of the ordinary human mind as fundamentally out of control, driven by emotions and propelled by racing thoughts, creating endless suffering through its inability to simply be still and see clearly. When stress levels rise, the metaphor intensifies to describe a mad monkey bitten by a scorpion, a mind that not only jumps chaotically but does so with aggressive frenzy, consumed by worst-case scenarios that it replays endlessly, raising blood pressure and creating psychological torment. Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, a contemporary Tibetan Buddhist master, teaches that monkey mind loves to create problems for us, but what it's doing isn't terribly mysterious or insurmountable. The monkey mind simply wants a job, something to occupy its restless energy. The tragedy is that when we don't give it a constructive task, it creates destructive ones, spinning stories about past regrets and future anxieties, generating conflicts with others, manufacturing dissatisfaction with present circumstances, all to keep itself busy, because a busy mind is what feels normal, even when that business creates suffering. Here's a radical reframe that Tibetan Buddhism offers. Instead of fighting the monkey mind, instead of trying to suppress or eliminate thoughts, you can give the monkey mind the job of meditation practice. When you provide your restless mind with a technique to focus on, whether that's following the breath, reciting a mantra, or observing thoughts without attachment, the monkey mind becomes your employee rather than your tormentor. You become the boss, the awareness that chooses what the mind focuses on, rather than being dragged helplessly from one thought association to the next. This shift from being identified with thoughts to being the awareness that observes thoughts represents one of the most profound transformations in human consciousness. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with the mental chatter in their heads. believing that the voice narrating their experience is who they are. Every thought that arises is taken as truth. Every emotion is responded to as if it represents accurate information about reality. Every impulse to act is followed automatically. This is what Buddhists call being asleep, living in delusion, trapped in ignorance, even though from the inside it feels like normal consciousness. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that this ordinary waking consciousness is actually a very limited and distorted way of experiencing reality. It's comparable to seeing the world through a dirty, cracked window and believing that the distortions in the glass are features of the landscape itself. The practice of meditation is essentially the practice of cleaning the window, or more accurately, recognizing that you are not the window but the clear awareness looking through it, and that you have the capacity to look past the distortions and see things as they actually are. The path to developing this capacity follows a systematic progression that Tibetan Buddhism has refined over centuries. The foundation practice is called shamatha, a Sanskrit term meaning calm abiding or tranquility meditation. Shamatha entails the cultivation of mental concentration for the purpose of strengthening and calming the mind. This isn't about suppressing thoughts or forcing the mind into artificial stillness, but rather about developing the ability to sustain attention on a chosen object, returning to that object again and again as the mind wanders, gradually training the monkey mind to settle naturally without force or contrivance. The progression of shamatha practice is mapped in extraordinary detail through what are called the 9 stages of mental abiding, a framework that describes exactly what happens as meditation develops from initial chaotic distraction to perfect, effortless concentration. In the first stage, called placement, the meditator can barely keep attention on the meditation object for more than a few seconds before thoughts pull awareness away. In the second stage, called continuous placement, the meditator can sustain attention for perhaps a minute or two before distraction occurs. In the third stage, called repeated placement, the meditator notices distraction quickly and brings attention back without long periods of being lost in thought. By the fourth stage, called close placement, the meditator no longer completely loses the meditation object, even when thoughts arise. In the fifth stage, called taming, the meditator begins to appreciate the benefits of concentration and becomes motivated to practice more consistently. In the sixth stage, called pacifying, subtle agitation and resistance to practice dissolve. In the seventh stage, called complete pacifying, even subtle forms of mental distraction can be eliminated through gentle effort. In the eighth stage, called single-pointed concentration, the meditator can sustain focused attention for extended periods with minimal effort. And in the ninth stage, called resting in equipoise, concentration becomes effortless and natural. The mind rests in perfect stability without any need for deliberate intervention. This progression isn't mere theory or religious doctrine. It's a precise map of neurological transformation that any practitioner can verify through direct experience. As you progress through these stages, you're literally rewiring your brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with attention and weakening pathways associated with distraction and compulsive thinking. Neuroscientific research on long-term meditators has documented measurable changes in brain structure and function that correlate with these classical Buddhist descriptions of mental development. But shamatha alone, while profoundly beneficial, isn't sufficient for complete liberation from the deceptions of thought. Calm concentration can temporarily suppress mental afflictions, but it doesn't uproot them. This is why Tibetan Buddhism emphasizes the integration of shamatha with vipassana, or insight meditation. While shamatha develops the stability and clarity of mind necessary to investigate reality deeply, vipassana uses that stable awareness to penetrate the fundamental nature of phenomena, seeing directly how all experiences are impermanent, how all phenomena lack inherent existence, how the self we take to be so solid and permanent is actually an ever-changing process without fixed identity. When fully developed, vipassana leads to the attainment of liberating wisdom and the ultimate cessation of suffering. This isn't about acquiring new information or adopting different beliefs. It's about direct, non-conceptual seeing of how reality actually is, unfiltered by the distorting lens of conceptual thought. And this seeing, when it becomes stable and continuous, fundamentally transforms your relationship with thoughts and emotions. The highest teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, the practices of Dzogchen and Mahamudra, point directly to this transformation. Dzogchen, which means great perfection or great completion in Tibetan, is considered the pinnacle of the 9 vehicles of Tibetan Buddhism. It's based on teachings brought to Tibet in the 8th century by the legendary master Padmasambhava and emphasizes the direct recognition of one's true nature or essence without relying on gradual development through the progressive stages of meditation. In Dzogchen meditation, practitioners are taught to recognize and rest in the innate nature of their mind, which is said to be pure and free from any kind of conditioning or defilements. The practice involves various techniques such as mindfulness, visualization, and mantra recitation, but the ultimate goal is to directly experience the nature of mind itself, beyond conceptual thoughts and dualistic perceptions. This nature of mind, called Rigpa in Tibetan, is described as primordially pure, naturally luminous, unborn, and unceasing, beyond all conceptual elaboration. It's not something you create or achieve, but something you recognize as having always been present, obscured only by the clouds of conceptual thinking and emotional reactivity. Mahamudra, which derives from Sanskrit words meaning great seal or great gesture, similarly emphasizes direct realization of the nature of mind without relying on conceptual analysis. Originating with the great Indian yogi Tilopa and transmitted through the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, Mahamudra describes a state of consciousness beyond all concepts and dualities. The practice centers on looking directly at the mind that is thinking, investigating what thoughts actually are, where they come from, where they go, what they're made of, until the meditator directly sees that thoughts have no substantial reality whatsoever, that they are simply appearances arising in awareness, ephemeral and empty like clouds forming and dissolving in the vast sky of consciousness. The Mahamudra approach to dealing with thoughts is particularly instructive. Rather than treating different thoughts differently, labeling some as good and others as bad, some as spiritual and others as worldly, Mahamudra instructs practitioners to treat all thoughts as the same, in order to gain sufficient distance and detachment from current mental states. This allows the mind to ease naturally into tranquility without effort or contrivance. The practice emphasizes suspending value judgments imposed on mental activities, not trying to create a state of tranquility, but allowing the mind to enter into tranquility naturally by recognizing that all thoughts, regardless of content, are fundamentally equal in their empty, insubstantial nature. This teaching directly challenges how most people relate to thoughts. Ordinarily, we believe certain thoughts deserve attention, while others should be suppressed. We identify with thoughts we consider positive or true, and fight against thoughts we consider negative or false. We build elaborate philosophical and psychological frameworks to justify which thoughts we should follow and which we should reject. But Mahamudra cuts through all this complexity with a simple recognition. Thoughts, regardless of content, are all fundamentally the same. They are all empty appearances in awareness. None of them possess inherent truth or reality. None of them are who you are. Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, one of the first Tibetan Buddhist masters to teach extensively in the West, offered particularly accessible instructions for working with the relationship between thoughts and emotions. He described emotion as a combination of self-existing energy and thoughts, explaining that emotion can't proliferate without our internal conversations. When you sit down to meditate feeling angry, the instruction is to label thoughts as thinking and let them go. Yet below the thoughts something remains, a vital, pulsating energy. There is nothing wrong, nothing harmful about that underlying energy. The practice is to stay with it, experience it, leave it as it is without adding conceptual elaboration. This distinction between the raw energy of emotion and the thought narratives we construct around that energy is crucial for understanding how thoughts deceive us. The energy itself, the felt sense of aliveness in the body, is simply energy, neither good nor bad. It's the stories we tell about that energy that create suffering. We feel a sensation of contraction in the chest, and immediately thoughts arise. Something is wrong. I'm being threatened. I need to defend myself. That person is terrible. I'm a victim. This shouldn't be happening. These thoughts transform neutral energy into full-blown emotional drama that can last for hours, days, or even years. But if you can catch the process early, if you can feel the energy without believing the narrative your thoughts construct around it, the energy simply moves through and dissolves naturally without creating suffering. This practice requires tremendous honesty and courage, because it means acknowledging how much of your emotional life is self-created through thought, rather than caused by external circumstances. It's confronting the uncomfortable truth that while you may not control what happens to you, you absolutely do control, or can learn to control, what thoughts you believe and follow. Most people resist this recognition because it feels like losing the right to be a victim, to blame others, to justify anger and resentment. But Tibetan Buddhism teaches that this resistance itself is one of the primary ways thoughts deceive you, convincing you that holding on to suffering is somehow protecting you when in fact it's only prolonging and intensifying the very pain you wish to escape. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, perhaps the most widely recognized Tibetan Buddhist teacher alive today, emphasizes the practical ethics that emerge from understanding how thoughts deceive us. In his teachings on training the mind, he explains that through analysis and contemplation, you will come to see that much of our misery, suffering, and pain really result from a self-centered attitude that cherishes one's own well-being at the expense of others, whereas much of the joy, happiness, and sense of security in our lives arise from thoughts and emotions that cherish the well-being of other sentient beings. This teaching directly addresses one of the most pernicious deceptions that thoughts perpetuate, the belief that happiness comes from prioritizing your own interests while happiness for others comes from them prioritizing theirs, leading to inevitable conflict and competition for scarce resources. But the Dalai Lama, drawing on centuries of Tibetan Buddhist wisdom and his own direct experience, teaches the opposite. Genuine happiness emerges from expanding your circle of concern beyond your narrow self-interest to include the welfare of others. This isn't naive idealism or religious sentiment. It's pragmatic psychology based on careful observation of how the mind actually works. When your thoughts are dominated by self-centeredness, constantly calculating what's in it for you, evaluating every situation based on whether it benefits or threatens your interests, you live in a state of chronic anxiety and dissatisfaction. No amount of success, wealth, pleasure, or security is ever enough because the self-centered mind always identifies new threats and deficiencies to worry about. But when you shift the focus of your thoughts toward how you can contribute to others' well-being, something remarkable happens. The anxious, grasping quality of mind relaxes. The sense of scarcity and competition dissolves. You experience genuine joy in others' success rather than envy. You feel connected rather than isolated. And paradoxically, this shift toward caring for others creates the very happiness and security that self-centered striving could never achieve. The Dalai Lama emphasizes developing the scope of your empathy so that it can extend to any form of life that has the capacity to feel pain and experience happiness. This isn't about being able to specifically identify with every living being, but about cultivating a general attitude that recognizes sentient life as precious and worthy of care. This attitude transforms your internal mental landscape from a battleground of competing interests into a collaborative space where your welfare and others' welfare are recognized as interdependent rather than conflicting. But cultivating this attitude requires seeing through one of thought's most fundamental deceptions, the illusion of separation, the belief that you are a completely independent, separate self fundamentally disconnected from others and the environment. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that this sense of separate selfhood is the root delusion from which all other mental afflictions stem. When you believe you are truly separate, attachment and aversion naturally follow as you grasp at what seems to benefit this separate self and push away what seems to threaten it. But when you see through the illusion of separation, when you recognize the profound interdependence of all phenomena, attachment and aversion lose their power because there's no longer a separate self to defend or promote. This recognition of interdependence isn't about adopting a new belief system. It's about direct seeing of how reality actually functions. Consider your physical body for a moment. Where exactly does your body end and the environment begin? You might point to your skin as the boundary, but your skin is constantly exchanging cells, moisture, and heat with the air around you. You're breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide in a continuous exchange with plants and atmosphere. The food you ate this morning is being broken down and incorporated into your cells, literally becoming part of what you call your body. The bacteria in your digestive system, numbering in the trillions and outnumbering your human cells, are essential to your survival, yet they're not you in any conventional sense. So where exactly is the boundary of this supposedly separate self? The same analysis applies to your mind. You didn't create the thoughts in your head from nothing. They arise based on language you learned from your culture, concepts you absorbed from your education, emotional patterns you developed through relationships with caregivers and peers, neural structures shaped by your genetic inheritance and environmental influences. Even the sense of being a witnessing subject observing objects, this most basic structure of consciousness, is conditioned by causes and conditions rather than being a self-existing independent entity. When you look closely, when you investigate directly, rather than relying on conceptual assumptions, you find that there is no findable, independent self anywhere, only an ever-changing stream of interdependent processes that you've labeled as me. Tibetan Buddhism describes this recognition as realizing emptiness, or shunyata, the teaching that all phenomena, including the sense of self, are empty of inherent independent existence. This isn't nihilism or the claim that nothing exists. It's the precise recognition that things exist interdependently, arising through causes and conditions, lacking any permanent separate essence. And this recognition, when it becomes direct and stable rather than merely intellectual, fundamentally transforms how you relate to thoughts. When you believe thoughts reflect an inherently existing reality and an inherently existing self that must navigate that reality, thoughts have tremendous power over you. They can create intense suffering, driving you to desperate actions to defend or promote this illusory self. But when you recognize that thoughts are simply empty appearances, patterns of mental energy arising and dissolving in the spaciousness of awareness, they lose their tyrannical hold. They become like clouds passing through the sky, sometimes beautiful, sometimes ominous, but never mistaken for the sky itself, never able to fundamentally disturb the vast openness in which they appear. This is what Tibetan Buddhist masters mean when they teach that even the illusory nature of apparent phenomena is itself an illusion. It's not just that samsara, the world of suffering and delusion, is illusory, while nirvana, the state of liberation, is real. Both samsara and nirvana are conceptual constructs, labels you impose on experience rather than inherent features of reality. The ultimate teaching is to pass beyond conceptions of things either existing or not existing, beyond ideas of either samsara or nirvana, and rest in the nature of mind itself, which has never been bound by delusion and never needs to be freed because it is primordially pure, naturally luminous, always already liberated. This might sound abstract or philosophical, but it has immediate practical implications for daily life. Every moment offers the opportunity to recognize the deceptive nature of thoughts or to be deceived by them once again. When a thought arises that someone has wronged you, you have a choice. You can believe that thought, identify with it, build a case for your victimhood and their villainy, generating anger that poisons your mind and possibly your actions. Or you can see that thought as simply a thought, a mental formation arising based on your conditioning and interpretations, not an accurate representation of a fixed reality. Seeing it as just a thought, you can let it pass without acting on it, without believing it, without suffering from it. When a thought arises that you're inadequate, that you're failing, that you'll never achieve what you hope for, you can believe that thought and spiral into depression and self-doubt, or you can recognize it as the voice of conditioning, perhaps messages you internalized from critical authority figures or from cultural standards you've absorbed, seeing it as just another empty appearance in awareness rather than truth about who you are. Seeing it this way, the thought loses its power to create suffering. This doesn't mean you become passive or incapable of discernment. Recognizing thoughts as empty doesn't prevent you from thinking strategically, learning from experience, or making wise choices. What it prevents is being tyrannized by thoughts, believing them absolutely, suffering from their content, allowing them to drive reactive behavior that creates more suffering for yourself and others. You can use thoughts as tools while no longer being used by them as weapons against your own peace and clarity. The transformation that Tibetan Buddhism offers is fundamentally about shifting your identity from being the thinker of thoughts to being the awareness in which thoughts appear. This shift, while it can be described in a sentence, typically requires years of dedicated practice to stabilize. The monkey mind doesn't surrender its dominance easily. It has momentum built up over a lifetime, perhaps many lifetimes according to Buddhist cosmology, of running the show, creating the sense of self, generating suffering through attachment and aversion, jumping from thought to thought without pause or reflection. But gradually, through consistent meditation practice, through repeatedly recognizing thoughts as thoughts rather than truths, through resting in awareness rather than identifying with mental content, the monkey mind begins to settle. It becomes less aggressive, less frantic, less high-strung, more peaceful. Not only that, it becomes more pliable and workable. You begin to experience what Tibetan Buddhists call natural liberation, where thoughts arise but liberate themselves on arising, leaving no trace, creating no karma, generating no suffering. You see a thought appear, recognize its empty nature, and it dissolves back into awareness without triggering the usual chain of mental proliferation and emotional reactivity. Eventually, with sufficient practice and under the guidance of qualified teachers, you may recognize what Dzogchen calls Rigpa, the primordial awareness that is your deepest nature. Rigpa is described as self-existing wakefulness, pure presence, the knowing quality of mind that has never been diluted even though thoughts and emotions have obscured it like clouds covering the sun. When Rigpa is recognized and stabilized, thoughts no longer deceive because there's no longer anyone to be deceived. There's only awareness recognizing its own manifestations, like the ocean recognizing that waves are nothing other than water, like space recognizing that appearances within it are insubstantial and ephemeral. This recognition is considered the ultimate goal of Tibetan Buddhist practice, not because it's something you achieve or attain, but because it's what you are, when all obscurations are removed, when all deceptions are seen through, when the mind rests in its natural state without fabrication or contrivance. And from this recognition, genuine compassion naturally flows, not as a moral obligation or religious duty, but as the spontaneous response of awareness to the suffering of beings who don't yet recognize their true nature, who remain trapped in the deceptions of thought, who believe themselves to be limited, separate, ultimately doomed selves struggling for survival in a hostile world. The path from where most people start, completely identified with and deceived by thoughts, to this ultimate recognition of Rigpa is long and requires tremendous dedication. But every step along this path brings measurable benefits: immediate relief from suffering, increased clarity and peace, improved relationships, better decision-making, greater resilience in the face of life's challenges. You don't need to achieve perfect enlightenment to benefit from understanding how thoughts deceive you and beginning to work skillfully with your mind. So what practical steps can you take right now to begin freeing yourself from thought's tyranny? Start with simple awareness. Throughout your day, pause periodically and notice that you're thinking. Notice the content of thoughts without judging them as good or bad. Notice how thoughts arise, how they trigger emotions, how they lead to other thoughts and cascading chains of association. Just notice, without trying to change anything, simply becoming aware of the process that usually runs completely unconsciously. Then begin a basic meditation practice if you haven't already. Even 5 or 10 minutes daily of sitting quietly and following your breath, returning attention to breathing whenever you notice it's wandered to thoughts, begins training the monkey mind to settle. Over time, extend the duration and explore different techniques: guided meditations, mantra practice, visualization, analytical meditation on the nature of self and phenomena. Find teachers, read texts, join practice communities that support your development. Most importantly, bring the insights from meditation into daily life. When you notice yourself suffering, pause and investigate what thoughts you're believing that create that suffering. When you notice yourself reacting with anger or fear or craving, see if you can catch the thoughts underlying those reactions and question whether those thoughts are actually true or just conditioned patterns playing out automatically. When you find yourself caught in mental proliferation, spinning stories about past and future, Gently redirect attention to the direct sensory experience of the present moment, where thoughts lose their power to create suffering. This is the path that Tibetan Buddhism has preserved and transmitted for over 1,000 years. The systematic training in recognizing how thoughts deceive and liberating awareness from their tyranny. It's not about becoming emotionless or detached from life, but about engaging life more fully from a place of clarity rather than confusion, wisdom rather than ignorance, compassion rather than self-centered grasping. The deceptions your thoughts create are powerful, but they're not ultimate. Beneath them lies your true nature, awareness itself, primordially pure and naturally liberated, waiting only for you to recognize what has always been present. What part of this exploration resonates most deeply with you? Do you recognize the ways your thoughts have been deceiving you? Have you experienced moments where you've seen through the illusion and tasted the freedom that comes from not being tyrannized by mental content? Share your insights and experiences in the comments below, because your reflections contribute to our collective understanding and support others on this path. If this content has helped you see your thoughts more clearly and opened possibilities for greater freedom, hit that like button to help more people discover these transformative teachings. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so now and activate notifications, because we're continuing to explore the deepest wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism applied to contemporary life, bringing ancient practices into dialogue with modern understanding to support genuine transformation. Share this video with anyone you know who struggles with anxiety, depression, negative thinking, or simply wants to understand their mind more deeply. Together, we're building a community of practitioners committed to waking up from the dream of delusion and discovering the natural freedom that is our birthright. Thank you for walking this path with open mind and sincere heart. Until next time, may you see clearly, act wisely, and rest in the natural peace of awareness itself.